Welcome back to the channel, folks. This is Jason, host of Fighting Words Financial. And today I am going to be talking about one of the emerging opportunities here that I've been predicting for a while right now, but we're really starting to see that start to come through in earnings. And it's a really strong showing right now, and it's setting financial companies up for really years and years of increased earnings. And we're going to talk about that. But I did want to talk about a little bit of other news right now, probably stuff that's not getting a lot of press, but you might want to think about it. One of the things that is commonly known among investors, professional investors like myself, is sort of when to make the, not when, but what happens to small caps on the way out of a recession. And in the last 6 recessions, and this is all the data that we have going back right now, in the last 6 recessions, small caps have really outperformed. This time around, it's likely to be magnified, but not for the reasons that you think. So plenty of volatility today on Wall Street. I don't know where the market ended up exactly, but it was probably down. I'm looking at Tesla right now, down $15 or $6.76. But look, a couple of things right now are causing a lot of portfolio managers to take a look at small caps. The performance, like I said, generally coming out of a recession is going to outperform other sectors. But this time around, because of higher interest rates, surging treasury yields, and the strength of the dollar, that effect might be magnified a little bit. Like in past recessions, if you saw outperformance of 2 or 3%, I think it may be a little bit steeper this time around. A couple of reasons why. Really, these small cap companies, they have market capitalizations of less than $2 billion. They tend to be a little bit less affected by some macro trends in the market coming out of a recession, but they're a lot less affected by currency fluctuations than larger companies. And that's a lot of what's impacting earnings right now. A lot of the earnings we're seeing coming out right now with these giant multinational corporations, they're taking a hit on profits, although revenues are up and certain types of income is up, expenses are higher as well. But the thing that's impacting the profits is the strength of the dollar overseas, making our products and services more expensive over there and reducing demand, particularly in Japan and in Europe. So these small cap companies are less likely to be affected by that because they're smaller companies and don't do a lot of business overseas for the most part. So if you look at right now, the Russell 2000 is down roughly 25% at this point. The other thing coming out of a recession, like I said, is interest rates. These companies, because they're not tied so heavily into a broader economy, they tend not to be as interest rate sensitive. One of the things to keep in mind that I just wanted to point out right away, this is not sort of what the title was generally talking about, but I do want to keep on rates for a little bit and talk about that before I get to the bank stocks and why they look pretty good. So so I did hear this, Tel 666-999 from the UK. Turbulent times here. The prime minister has resigned, so hoping that a new person comes in to steady the ship. So I read an article in Barron's, or maybe it was on Yahoo Finance. I don't know, but I'm unsure whether the characterization of that article is really accurate. It was really highly sensationalized, stating that the UK is absolutely in crisis. Your elections and governments don't work the way that ours do. We don't have an entirely unique system in Western democracies, but it is very different than most European democracies. And elections can be more frequent in parliamentary democracies than they are here in the U.S. And but this is absolutely unprecedented. 45 days into into a prime minister being in office and her resigning, that's pretty amazing. And did want to talk about that a little bit, but like I said, I don't generally comment on the politics of a foreign democracy. So not that I watch the news, but Ukraine isn't in the news as much in the UK. Has anything changed? I don't know when the last time you looked about Ukraine news, but a lot has changed. And look, you got to remember too, we get our sources. Our sources here in the West are very firmly pro-Ukrainian. It doesn't mean they're not doing good reporting, But I think they're really underplaying the dangers of societal mobilization in Russia at this point, and they're forgetting the Herculean tasks that Russia was able to accomplish during World War II against an existential threat. Ukraine is not an existential threat, but many people in Russia are convinced that it is. When you look at the Herculean task of, say, removing their entire industrial base from west of the Urals and moving it east of the Urals out of the range of German bombers, that was an industrial task that would seem, I mean, it seems almost impossible. That's exactly what they did. The entire country turned into a factory to produce weapons of war, and they mobilized almost every military age male. And, their tactics, organization, and logistics don't look a lot different than they do today. And they were still able to beat the German war machine, even with all of those inefficiencies. And they did handily beat the German war machine. They were the beneficiary, of course, of the Lend-Lease program, where the United States donated tons of supplies and military equipment, weapons, that sort of thing, to the Russians during World War II. This time around, that aid is on the side of the Ukrainians. And but don't this, in my opinion, this is not going to be over by summer like the Ukrainian or one Ukrainian official thought it was going to be. This may turn out to be a generational war where we end up having a ceasefire sometime in the next 2 to 3 years. We end up having a third war. We're already in the second Ukraine war. We end up having a third war and then a fourth war. It's possible that it turns out to be a generational conflict. And so that's kind of where I'm on that. And I don't know, on one side starting to say that the blank check is going to end at some point. And there's a lot to read into that comment. Maybe that person was saying there should just be more oversight on the money that we're spending in Ukraine. Maybe they're saying that the spigot is going to be turned off. I do not wish us to not support Ukraine anymore. But yes. Anyway, Tell 666-999 says, I wouldn't say crisis. However, the mini budget caused mass panic trying to spend our way out of trouble. Interesting. So, and there were interesting reactions on our side of the pond here regarding the monetary policy of the Bank of England and the government. And one of the comments that was made is that the British government is acting like a third world country in terms of monetary policy. I thought that was a bit unfair criticism. And I guess what struck me to be the oddest was the tax deduction strategy and the amount of resistance to it. So we could probably still get away with doing exactly that here in the United States, even though over the last 50 years, that strategy has proven not to be effective at all at removing us or taking us out of recessions, improving middle class life. It has actually been particularly damaging to the power of labor to negotiate better wages. And what's happening right now with wages and why labor has so much power is it just isn't enough labor to go around. That is coming to an end, though. Remember that the goal of the Federal Reserve is actually recession, in this case, to reduce demand. They're not really making a secret. I don't know why people think that leading or reading the tea leaves here is really difficult in this time period. They want higher unemployment. They want it to be for an extended period of time. They want to kill inflation. I think the strategy this time around is probably to raise interest rates to somewhere around 5% or so, at least 4.5% by the end of the year. And in that case, in the next case, they are going to sell the government bonds that are on their balance sheet and remove money from the economy. They have $9 trillion that they can remove from the economy by selling those government bonds. They're going to do it, of course, partially by roll off, partially by selling it. And also, the way they're going to do that is to keep demand steady. But remember, we're setting off on this multi-year expansion in the fixed income market, where it's going to become much more important to your long-term investment portfolio. I know a lot of you folks don't have bonds right now, but we just came off of the worst year in bond market history. A bond index fund really might not be a bad idea right now, especially one that is touted as a long-term bond fund, but maybe has an average duration somewhere in the 5 to 7 year range. And a lot of them are going to have that because they're anticipating that there's going to be higher yields on the longer end of the spectrum, 20 to 30 years in a couple of years, right? So this is one of the reasons why interest income at banks is showing tremendous amounts of improvement right now. And that's because they're preparing the way for a better interest rate environment and better returns in fixed income, which we haven't really had fixed income yet. So final question, technically we have 2 quarters of negative growth. And from what I gather, the US, even UK have had that. Why doesn't the Fed just say we're in a recession? So I understand why this one's a little bit unique. And usually a recession, when we have 2 quarters of negative growth, it would be negative growth in nominal terms, which we don't have right now. It's negative growth in real terms because we're factoring in inflation. But the other end of that, which is not part of the definition that probably should, we should be losing jobs. But at this point right now, employment numbers actually keep improving. We are at full employment. And it's very hard to say we're in a recession when nominally the economy is still growing and we're at full employment. The fact that that life's a little hard right now and people are upset about inflation, that doesn't actually mean that we are in. Yeah, I think we need to rethink the idea of what an actual recession is, and that's kind of the thing that I'm looking at right now too. Bill Ackman had a great series of tweets earlier in the summer talking about this, and saying, "Hey, we're not in recession, despite the fact that we had decline in real GDP because of the employment situation, and we're not looking at an improvement in inflation." There are actually some really good signs with that as well. A lot of it has to do with shipping, which I'm going to get to. A lot of that has to do with rents. Let's remember that rents are something like 35% of the core inflation number that is the Fed's favorite number to look at. So until rents come down, inflation is not coming down. So there's a lot of different reasons why, but I would consider us, without mincing words, that we are already in a recession. We've been in the recession since June, and we should start planning accordingly. I think that the recession has largely been priced in. It's the severity of the recession right now that's going to affect the market going forward. So let me see here. But yeah, we're definitely in a recession. I don't think there's anything like that. So Douglas Beebe, I guess we're back to Ukraine. I just caught a show that's about how some of the annex sections east of the river, previously having been part of Russia centuries ago, and that they're primarily ethnic Russian. Yeah, that's actually primarily due to ethnic cleansing and removing troublesome populations and repopulating them with Russians. So most people aren't even aware that Russians are not indigenous to Crimea at all. They displaced the Turkish population that lived there, the Greek population that lived there. There was an ethnic Germanic population that was actually completely eliminated. And of course, the Crimean Tatars, who were probably the dominant ethnic strain there prior to about 120 years ago. And at the end of World War II, they were mostly dispersed and across the Russian Empire. It basically an ethnic cleansing. This was what would be defined as genocide today, which they were dispersed across the Russian Empire to dilute their ethnicity and to get rid of it. And under UN definitions, that's actually classified as genocide. And then their population was replaced by Russians. So the essential Russian way of war that's been waged since World War II is to basically walk into a territory and mow it down with artillery, and mow everything down with artillery. And then the population in the war zone is essentially going to self-segregate into 2 different populations, meaning that the civilian population doesn't want anything to do with the conflict, is going to flee. And whoever is left is going to be considered a combatant, and it's shoot on sight. And if you capture any of those folks and you don't bother killing them, then you disperse them across Russia, sorry, not the Soviet Union. And there's never going to be a high enough concentration of them to rebel or anything like that. That is the strategy that has been used since the days of the Russian Empire: is deportation of large indigenous populations, importation of Russians. This also underpins the justification for invading any area where people speak Russian. I mean, let's imagine if Mexico decided to invade Texas because it used to be part of Mexico, and then demand, set up a fake vote in South Texas, and then demand that this United States cede Mexico. I don't think we'd handle that. But for a couple of reasons, Mexico wouldn't do that. They recognize the United States as a sovereign nation, and we have worked together over the years to make sure that we're not enemies. Every country that borders Russia that is afraid of being invaded by Russians and that is not a part of NATO essentially has been invaded by Russians over the last 30 years or so. And that is and this is the thing that a lot of folks just refuse to understand, that Ukraine is a sovereign nation. Their borders were agreed upon in multiple treaties. And a sovereign nation can do whatever the hell they want to. If Mexico would wanted to join the Warsaw Pact, I'm sure we would have had a lot to say about that. But we made sure that we put Mexico in a position where they didn't desire that, meaning we had tons of economic contact between us, good relations between us, and respect for mutual sovereignty. And I mean, I could use Canada as an example as well. So also, hold on here. Thanks for what you do. Love this channel. Keep my mouth shut for now. No need to keep your mouth shut. Please comment. You always have some nice and insightful questions. So thank you very much. And yeah, so in fact, anybody who would like to ask a question, just as a reminder, sometimes with the software that I'm using, I don't necessarily see all of the questions right away, and it takes me a while to get to them. In addition to that, my internet connection has been a little bit spotty for the last 2 days or so. I'm not sure what's going on in my neighborhood. It's not like I live out in the middle of nowhere. I do live really close to the border, but I don't think that has anything to do with what's going on. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I have talked about Ukraine really in terms of its economic impact for the most part. On the rest of the world, and I haven't really commented it too much on other aspects of the conflict, really just about its economic impact. But I'm happy to talk about that. So here a second here. Doug Beal says, also the comments of Putin were outed. Look for who will be back, as many oligarchs would like. So yeah. So we're not looking at the people that are in power right now are actually old guard oligarchs. That is actually a new round of oligarchs. And that's one of the things that's really interesting about the way U.S. sanctions are working right now, is they're actually sanctioning the wrong people. So there was an entirely separate group of oligarchs from the collapse of the Soviet Union till about 2000 when Putin took over. That was basically the old kleptocracy, the people who essentially stole the entire industrial base of the Soviet Union, claimed it for their own, hired their own private armies, and then used the power of the state to legitimize them. Putin, when he rolled into office, he waited a couple of years, but one by one, he tamed those folks either by buying their businesses and converting them back to state enterprises, or by murdering them, and then a new round of oligarchs sort of took charge. And you could even look kind of a second round of oligarchs, like right around the 2010 era, that he really feels is really loyal to him. But we're sanctioning a lot of these oligarchs right now that have assets in the West or live in the West, and those are the ones that were really sort of out of power anyway. Like, they were extremely wealthy because they took payoffs from Putin in order to get out of politics. But that's really sort of the that set of oligarchs that was like really, really powerful from 1990 to 2000 or so. They're still rich, but they lack political power and really, direct access to Putin at this point. They're no longer politically important. But coincidentally, not coincidentally, rather, that's the largest group of individuals who have been sanctioned, the people who don't have tons of power. They just have assets in the West that can be seized, and it looks very good. So, yeah. So so that's one of the things that, but you are correct, though, that the oligarchs who might replace Putin are possibly more hawkish than Putin is himself. They are. I do not have the faith that they can do what the USSR did in a lot of ways, but I'm not going to underestimate them either. And so I've been thinking about this a lot, actually, in terms of global strategy here when it comes to Ukraine. And I don't see a way around this being a generational conflict unless Russia does what they've done in the past, which is essentially disperse the Ukrainian population as a whole across Russia to basically to dilute its power there. The race basically is going to be the defeat of Ukraine before Russia itself falls apart, and we see a repeat of 1917 rather than a repeat of 1945. Personally, I'm not hoping for the repeat of 1917 either. I think that the fall of Putin would actually mean the fractionalization of Russia into many different republics. I think that there would be a revival movement in Chechnya and Dagestan and a number of other areas, particularly areas way out east that would probably break apart. And I don't want a chaotic Russia. I just don't think that's good for anyone. I don't think it's really good for the civilian population. I don't think it's good for business. And it's going to make commodities around the world much more expensive for a very, very long period of time. And this is one of the things that I think we should all want, is to some degree a normalization of business relationships with Russia and with China. And if you guys were paying attention to the post that I made about Li Auto, XPeng, and of course BYD and NIO, where I talked about we need to reevaluate whether or not they're going to be able to fulfill their promises, not in terms of vehicle production, just electric vehicles. That's entirely possible. But what they're promising in terms of their AI technology. The sanctions that the United States put on China right now are not affecting just Americans. They're not getting just Americans to quit their jobs and leave China. It's really affected everyone in the Western world. And it's the most impactful sanctions or economic punishment that has ever been levied on China. It is far more effective than any of the tit for tat show economic warfare that we've been involved with China since 2019 when tariffs started. This is far more impactful and far more important and not unexpected. Okay. So basically there were certain types of technology, machines, and expertise that is now, when it comes to the manufacture of semiconductors, that it's now illegal to export to China. Not only that, you essentially had almost every executive and senior engineer who was American or Western in general working in China for a semiconductor company has just quit. And they're coming home, or they're going to Taiwan or elsewhere, or to the Netherlands where they have, or to England where you have major chip making operations. You've had TSMC, which is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing. They are going to stop doing business with China. That is where China sources most of their most sophisticated AI chips, particularly those used in autonomous technologies. That is sourced there. There are a number of parts, not just one or two, like in most articles that you're reading, but there are a number of different processes in chip manufacture that actually require machines manufactured in the U.S. and require U.S. expertise. This is going to, and this is replacing that expertise and replacing those machines is not out of the question for China. It's going to be difficult. It's going to require an investment in technology. And most importantly, it's going to take time. And it's going to give the U.S. a ton of breathing room to really grab the reins again in terms of being that technology leader. And it's going to reshore semiconductor manufacturing here to the United States, guaranteed. It is going to enormously benefit some chip designers and manufacturers here in the United States, but it's going to cause massive chaos. And it's going to cause sourcing issues for every auto company on the planet right now. And that's coming. And it's also going to cause tons of legal cases, as it looks like we're going to be using the World Court to go after China for copyright infringements and patent infringements left and right at this point. That is what's coming. So I am having to seriously reconsider. Like, I've lost so much money now on XPeng that I'm almost like, well, screw it. I don't have that many shares, so I might as well just hold on to what I have and let's see what happens. Because honestly, that is where we are right now. It's going to take time to understand whether or not XPeng, Li, all these folks are really going to be able to make it to the point where the Chinese semiconductor industry is able to replace some of the more sophisticated chips that they were sourcing from Taiwan. Taiwan, in terms of, and which is great for us. Taiwan was the largest producer of, they had a giant slice of that semiconductor industry. They just cut out China as a partner. And now lots of that is going to come to the United States. The other thing you can expect is a crackdown on Chinese engineers working for Western countries, much more in the way of investigations of industrial espionage, of course, related to governments as well. All of that is coming, guys. And this is all the normal part of of affairs of dealing with a country normally that's an economic rival, but we just haven't been doing it for the last 30 years. We have let our rivals get away with a lot of things, and that has all stopped in the last 2 years. We have really cracked down on our economic rivals, and I really think that the summit between Putin and Xi back in March, where they declared a friendship without limits that certainly has limits since the government of China decided to abstain from the vote on condemning Russia for annexing the 4 Ukrainian territories, rather than vetoing that motion. They abstained from it or voting no on it. In fact, the only countries that voted no were like Syria, Nicaragua, Belarus, and there was one other in there. It's not important. There were only 4 countries. It was like 139 abstains. But I really think that sort of triggered a harder line in general. This is probably even going to affect BYD, folks. So how it affects those companies, I don't know how it's going to affect them in the long term, but I know in the medium term, it doesn't look good. It really doesn't look good. But even then, I want to keep an eye out for things to see how much they're really disrupted, because, like I said, this was not unexpected. The Chinese government has to have a plan to deal with this, because this couldn't have been unexpected. So, all right. So tell 666999 says, okay, genuinely final question. From the U.S. point of view, did you see the U.K. as economically sound and astute country? Well, I certainly do. And I think that most economists, financial professionals, and educated folks probably will. But you got to have to remember there's a large strain of the population of the United States that is completely and utterly ignorant of anything that happens beyond our borders. And they're mostly ignorant of things that happen here as well. And for example, you could probably go to any town in Alabama, which is literally the worst place to live in the development world, rated by the UN as the worst place to live in the developed world, is Alabama. And Alabamans would still be convinced that they are better than any country in the outside of the United States, or their state is better than any country in the world, just by virtue of being in the United States, when their poverty levels are going to be the highest, their education levels are going to be the lowest, their health outcomes are going to be the worst, child mortality is going to be the worst, maternal mortality is going to be the worst, obesity rates are horrible, morbidity rates are absolutely insane there, and life expectancy is something like 8 years off the average for developed countries. And that's largely because of the propaganda that we feed ourselves. We don't need a government to do this for us. We feed ourselves a steady diet of American exceptionalism, where we believe that we are special and we are better than the rest of the world. And this American exceptionalism keeps us from addressing very real problems here in the United States, because we can always say, oh, we're better than these people, when the reality is we're not. And it's preventing us from truly living up to the vision of that I think that a lot of folks have in this country, which is to have a country where everyone enjoys universal human rights and everyone is able to live a life of dignity. I personally don't like, now when I go to any city in the United States now, if I travel, and even small towns, and I noticed this actually when I was traveling in the South, even in small towns right now, there's homeless people all over the United States. And it's because the cost of housing is just astronomically high. And the fact that there's almost zero safety net. You miss 2 paychecks and you're on the streets here for the most part. And that's how a lot of people end up homeless, is not because they're terrible people. It's just because they had a run of bad luck. And our belief in American exceptionalism prevents us from addressing this as a systematic problem. It's always assumed to be a problem of the individual. So no, I think that is the viewpoint of a lot of Americans. They're so self-propagandize that they don't necessarily see any country out of the United States, outside of the United States, as being economically sound and astute. I definitely see, I definitely admire, especially the financial acumen of the UK. I admire their dominance of the financial world, how they created this financial system that was replicated in Hong Kong. It was replicated in Singapore. It was replicated in the United States. And basically we operate a lot like London does. And this is the backbone of the economy of the entire world. This is how the financial system works. Most of that was derived in the UK in the 19th century with sound practices. And so I definitely see the UK as being economically sound and astute. But I do think there's always this love of the idea of trickle down economics, which is demonstrated over and over and over that it does not work. And it's literally like, I'm going to give billionaires a full banquet and you get to eat their crumbs. And somehow on both sides of the pond, people keep buying that as an economically sound policy. The most economically sound policies are the ones that allow the most innovation and freedom. And but that's all I'm going to say about the UK right now. To be honest with you, I'd like to know more about the UK than I currently do. So, a second here. So Michael Will says, you called the drop in the price of oil. So the price of oil is going to remain over $85 a barrel, or close to $85 a barrel, unless something drastic happens. And that is largely because the Saudis stabbed us in the back by lowering oil production by about $2 million a barrel. And that was done deliberately to help Russia. That is my firm belief. Now, I don't have any evidence of that, but I don't think that it's a coincidence that Russian oil essentially is profitable and not profitable. Basically, Russia is able to fund the operations of their government if the price of oil is over $85 a barrel. And if the price of oil is under $85 a barrel, then Russia has trouble meeting its financial obligations. Now, combine that with the fact that we have now frozen a lot of their foreign currency reserves and they don't have access to dollars anymore, and we weaponize the dollar. The price of oil would actually need to be significantly higher than 85. I don't know exactly where that is, if that's over 100 or something like that. In order for them to not feel any financial pressure, the price of oil would have to be much higher than that. Now, they've already committed to selling some of that oil to India at cut rate prices. And, remember, India has also always had, since independence, a policy of non-alignment. So the fact that they didn't go along with the West with sanctions and all that stuff like that, that shouldn't be no surprise to you. And we shouldn't expect that. They've always been a declared non-aligned country. And we have made some moves in the last dozen years or so, 20 years or so, that kind of make them nervous. So one of those things is selling F-16s to Pakistan. We should sell something like air defense systems. Our air defense systems are clearly superior to those of the Russians. We should sell our air defense systems to India as a way to counterbalance that. And the other thing we should do is not sell the Saudis weapons. We should cancel a couple of contracts. We should, something like that. Like, this was an absolute betrayal of the West. This was a realignment of the Saudis. You can say it's just business, but just business shouldn't benefit Russia in this manner. And so it's an absolute betrayal, and we should be reconsidering. And maybe this was done by the petulant Mohammed bin Salman, who's the king of Saudi Arabia, because of some insults or veiled insults that Biden or anyone else threw against him over the Khashoggi affair. A mature leader wouldn't work that way, especially considering the fact that the West has clearly demonstrated at this point that Russian military equipment is second rate. Even the best military equipment they have is second rate. The West is actually sending not our best equipment to the Ukrainians right now, and it's proving to be superior in every way to Russian equipment, which means that this is really good for the United States. we're going to sell lots of weapons. They're going to be in demand. Demand for Russian weapons is going to drop. You're going to be looking at second-tier countries are going to be using Russian weapons in the future. China is probably likely to entirely go their own way when it comes to weapons production, because they've seen exactly what the vaunted technologies that the Russians have always been so proud of. And they typically talk about technologies that they don't really use anyway. Like, for example, the T-14 Armata tank, there may be 75 of those operating, or the Su-57. There may be a dozen of those. Actually, maybe 8 of those operating at this point. And that's the thing, is they brag about their technologies long before they're able to produce them. And at this point, we're looking at some of their newer 4th generation technologies are proving to be helpless in the face of some anti-platform technology, which is very cheap. Like the NLAW, I think, is only $15 to $30,000 per shot or something like that, versus, a $1.5 million tank. This is and we're looking probably at a greater investment in anti-platform technologies. And I expect a lot of that business is going to go Sweden's way. A lot of it's going to go Finland's way. Some of it's going to go Germany's way. But the vast majority of it is coming here to the United States. And we're going to see a generational investment in defense technologies. But I see the price of oil, Michael, staying relatively high, 85 to 100 something dollars a barrel. This does not justify, of course, gas prices at the pump right now, either in the United States or in Europe. That is entirely due to other market forces. But also the fact that the oil companies are raking in money now at record rates, when we're not seeing record oil prices, and we're also not seeing record demand. I was perfectly willing to say it's political posturing to talk about the oil companies making record profits. But when you look behind the political posturing, you see that what is not true is that demand is higher than it's ever been. What is not true is that we're seeing disruptions, these massive disruptions that usually happen in the late summer and fall due to hurricane season. We're not seeing those disruptions in supplies or in refining capability. We're seeing a lot of price gouging, and we're seeing a lot of action in the futures market as well. That's caused some that's pushed the price of oil up and pushed the price of gasoline up. But no, I do see it basically remaining anywhere between $85 and $100 a barrel, and maybe a little bit lower than that today. I haven't looked, but yeah. Yes. So surely if President Xi gets another term, he will do if he told to stop. I don't think that the power of President Xi to tell Russia to stop the war, Putin would. I don't think he would do that. Their relationship doesn't work that way. And let's remember, this is a new cozy relationship. Between the late 1960s and 10 years ago, they did not have a good relationship at all. They are this is an alliance of convenience in a lot of ways. And I think the question of if President Xi gets another term is I would be absolutely stunned if he did not. If you were paying attention a couple of weeks ago, there was a rumor that President Xi had been arrested, and that the country, there was a military coup or something like that. It turns out it was completely a fabrication on the part of social media. And I posted something like that to my Patreon group saying, "Hey, don't pay any attention to this. It's I can't verify it. The only people picking it up is an Indian news source." But I think that President Xi is relatively secure. But let's remember that Chinese politics are basically the blackest of boxes out there. We really don't know what goes on in terms of internal politics of China, just like we don't really know what goes on in terms of the internal politics of Russia. It's always somebody who leaves that power structure who's telling us how things work. And if you know anything about being privy to classified material, by the time you divulge something like that, it's probably out of date. So, but I will agree with you that Xi is going to look at how this invasion of Ukraine turns out. I don't think that Xi wants to go to war to bring Taiwan back within China. I think he wants some sort of negotiated settlement. But I think that he seriously damaged the opportunity for a negotiated settlement and seriously damaged the opportunity to lessen economic disruption, the disruption in business with Taiwan, by saying Hong Kong is now completely under our control. Hong Kong is completely under the control of China. The old Hong Kong basically doesn't really exist anymore. I have a lot less faith in the financial markets of Hong Kong than I did before the CCP was in charge. And so I don't think that he really wants war with Taiwan. And I think he's boxed himself in with these comments, and it's just going to steal Taiwanese resolve. I wouldn't be surprised if Taiwan starts putting together territorial defense programs like Ukraine did in order to have a couple million man reserve and contingencies to use. So if you look at Taiwan and you look at Crimea, there are a number of similarities that you might not think about. So Crimea during World War II was never really fully pacified. The Russian population and the Tatar population that lived there, and actually some deported Chechen populations that lived there as well, carried on a really long and successful guerrilla war against the German occupiers in the mountainous center of Crimea, and it's very rugged territory. Taiwan is kind of a lot the same way, and I think that we're probably going to see some sort of preparations like that as a deterrent that would make any occupation of Taiwan extremely expensive in terms of live and material. So in China, King Carlo Bassi says, I don't see an end to this madness now with China going more. So I think Xi made a strategic miscalculation by saying what he did about Hong Kong. But let's remember the Chinese society as a whole, they like things to be calm. They don't like disruption. In fact, there's a major Chinese curse that we are taught, of course, when you study international relations. The Chinese have a curse that's really old that says, may you live in interesting times, right? They don't say go to hell or anything like that. They say, may you live in interesting times. Because interesting times for them mean horrible times where millions of people starve. But I don't think they want, they want war or anything like that. Crazy by the second, hiding numbers, massive lockdowns, nonstop and imminent Taiwan attack. I don't think an attack on Taiwan is imminent. I think that the unified response of the West has frightened China at this point, or not frightened, has convinced them that it would be extremely costly to invade Taiwan, as we would treat Taiwan as a NATO ally, even though we call them a non-NATO ally. We would treat them as a NATO ally. And I do think that their policy of zero COVID is a problem, but I think we're beyond the point where COVID would cause the kind of disruption that they feared at the beginning of COVID. And I wanted to talk about that because what they are losing right now is a large degree of economic dominance. And I'm glad you brought that up, King Carlo. By the way, as a reminder, super chat features are on if you guys feel so inclined. But you brought up, very importantly, this is something that I wanted to show. Because of COVID lockdowns, China, being the factory of the world, they're losing more and more of their manufacturing and export dominance. And let's take a look at the data. So exports in furniture, apparel, footwear, travel goods, handbags, minerals, and science and technology are all declining from China. China's zero COVID policy is a big factor, with the latest port, the port of Ningbo, being the world's largest port to date, has been impacted. So China is losing more and more manufacturing and export market share in key sectors to Asian neighbors with recent zero COVID policies. Once you diversify your sources, they tend to stay diversified as long as price differences between them are relatively similar. But we're looking at clothing and accessories. It hasn't been an even decline, but since 2016, it's gone from 41% down to 37%. Furniture, that dominance has gone from 64% to 53%. Footwear has gone from 72 to 65. Travel goods and handbags has gone from 83 down to 70%. So Vietnam has been the largest beneficiary of this. They sucked up a lot of that. A lot of it has to do with cheap labor practices and the fact that they have the ability to add to a couple of really good natural ports there as well. And they've just simply been more cooperative in a lot of different ways. And so they announced in July the creation of a new transshipment container terminal project near Ho Chi Minh City, This is Old Saigon. Once completed, this terminal would become the largest in the nation. Both Maersk and CMA CGM are investing in their own facility expansions in that region. And of course, Maersk and CMA CGM are two of the largest shipping companies in the world. So shipping lines are looking for new markets and investing and expanding into new markets. They perceive demand and are creating a market with these investments. So Vietnam's share of global exports and key consumer goods has increased since 2016. Furniture has gone from 8% up to 17. Footwear has gone from 12 to 16. Travel goods and handbags has gone from 6 to 10%. This is pretty significant. This is a sign that China is losing market dominance here. So we're also looking at Bangladesh and Malaysia, with Bangladesh's global share of clothing exports going from 10 to 12%, and Malaysia's share of exports right around 14% at this point, but spiking at around 19%. So so we're looking at ocean bookings from cargo ships from China en route to the U.S. are down significantly. Really, really down. And if you look at October right here, down pretty far. So I don't know if this is from tons or ships or how it's measured here. Yeah, shippers placing orders for container transport is what it is. And that's down significantly from July of 2021, which says a lot too about decreasing demand overall. And of course, it says something about inflation as well. A lot of what's been adding to inflation has been supply chain pressures. So we see here, logistics managers tell CNBC that orders for cargo arriving from China to the U.S. in November are expected to be down by 40 to 50%. The combination of excess inventory coupled with reduced demand continues to weigh on Pacific import volume. And I just read today that in the first, it's actually East Coast ports have taken over, first in this century at least, East Coast ports have taken over in terms of volume. But this is a big deal. But we're looking at worldwide right now. Ocean freight orders are signaling a big drop in consumer demand. Ocean shippers are seeing a 20% drop in ocean freight orders. The declines include machinery, household products, industrial products, and some apparel. Ocean carriers are canceling as much as 50% of sailings to rebalance vessel capacity demand. And freight prices on one key route from Asia to the West Coast are now down by more than 80% from last year. So those outrageous freight fees that you heard about last year, those are gone. They're down by 80% in some markets. So let's see which route they were talking about here. Let me see here. Let's see. According to Freightos, the Asia West Coast prices fell 8% to 2,978 per 40 equivalent units. That rate is 82% lower than the same time last year. That's pretty amazing. 82%. So big news on that front, which is going to help tame inflation, guys. This is one of the reasons why we may not see interest rates do the 1982 thing. We may see a pause at somewhere around 5% or so. And then at that point, in order to continue quantitative tightening, we're going to see more and more bond sales by the Federal Reserve to reduce that $9 trillion balance sheet. Does China actually care about IP copper? No, at this point they don't. No, but they will when we start suing them in international court, and they have to make good on those, or they will start making that, and we start sanctioning companies that they do business with outside of the United States as well. They're going to care about that. So, Catalan Divine says the market is going to zero. Well, then you should invest in guns and ammunition if the market is going to zero. So, Yeah. So my long soliloquy on Alabama, which I know people there, I know great people in Alabama, but I live in California, the land of crime, drugs, and taxes. You really need to take a look at statistics, man. California and all of those metrics actually doesn't fare too badly, particularly if you're in the middle class and you make under $100,000 or so. Your tax burden is lower than it would be if you lived in Texas. When you this is something that I forget the name of the institute that did this. So this is a major study when they looked at they took tax returns from California and tax returns from people in Texas and looked at median income and then looked at certain income cutoffs, and basically you're paying just the same or higher taxes if you live in Texas and own property, or even if you don't own property, you're going to pay higher rents because you own property. And a lot of it depends on what market you're in, of course. So Bassam Nath says, is it a good time to buy? So Bassam, I'm actually buying at any time in the market, good or bad. A dollar cost average my way in. I tend not to make a ton of large purchases, largely because I don't know when it's a good time to buy in the market or not. I tend to believe that the market has found a temporary bottom right now. It's accepted and priced in recession. It's the severity of the recession and what they expect, which is going to determine the direction of the market. I tend to believe that we're going to have a longer than normal recession, and it's going to be fairly mild. So, Catalan Divine says the market will come down another 20 to 30%. Okay. I don't based on what due diligence. So my 3,600 number was based on what fair market valuation for the market would have been at the peak in January of 2022. If the numbers for the expansion of price of the S&P 500 in terms of multiples of earnings versus actual earnings was inverted, because normally about 70% of the growth of the S&P 500 should be as a result of earnings. About 30% should be expansion of price to earnings multiples. That was inverted in this last run up in the market. So I discounted all of that, drew it back down, and said fair market value for the market should be right around 3,600. It's actually like 3,640 or something like that. But I want to give myself a little wiggle room there. So that's fair market value. Now, if the market perceives that we're going to have a really severe recession, it'll probably be below that 3,600. But I think we're going to bounce off 3,600 several more times before we see the market take off there. Brian Lee says, hey, Jason, how you doing? I'm doing pretty good, man. I actually feel pretty good. So see here. For me, Saudi Arabia's key asset is oil. That's their only asset. And it's their only asset that, let's remind Saudi Arabians that they can't defend their only asset. They're completely reliant on the West to defend their only asset. I don't think that Saudi Arabia could defend their oil from the United Arab Emirates if the United Arab Emirates wanted to take it away. So I worked in Saudi Arabia for 9 months back in the early 2000s and was utterly unimpressed by the Saudis that I worked on. I actually worked with a lot of Egyptians and Jordanians and people from all over the Arab world who were really good at their jobs and who were competent engineers and were very and hardworking. The Saudi population, on the other hand, has not made the investment in education, has not made an investment in developing a work ethic, and has not made the investment in doing a lot of things. They tend to just pay someone to do everything they want done. They don't have the expertise to run their own oil industry without the West. So that is their only asset. If we were to stop buying that asset because we went all electric for transportation, we had massive solar, wind, geothermal, all kinds of nuclear energy around there. We still need to buy oil for plastics and things like that. But we would need about 26% of today's demand. Like literally only 26% of oil consumed in the United States is not related directly to transportation. And I think 54% is directly related to passenger transportation. So that's an enormous amount there. So I would, I think Saudi Arabia should take our reluctance to sell them the most advanced weapon systems a little bit more seriously. I think they should take that a little bit more seriously. And who knows, maybe we get friendly with some other partner in the region. So yeah, there we go. We see here. Hal says, again, super interesting comments on the war. I have to drop my kid to school right now. Have a great end of week. Thank you so much. You have a great end of week too. So thank you. I'm British Chinese. My folks are from Hong Kong. They say the same thing. Done trust in the systems. 2 systems in one country. It was a lie. It was pretty good for a 20-year run, right? Or was it 1997 to present? Pretty good for a 20-year run. But yeah, it was done once they decided to impose Chinese security laws on Hong Kong. Hong Kong no longer exists. It was a lie now. So Hong Kong was British ruled until 1997. Therefore, the experience, the democracy the UK had, like my folks that were for 2-system rule, thought it would work, and then the dark times happened. So Brian Lee says, China, no need to warn. What China has, China will have in the next few years. It's just politics. China and the U.S. consider it mouth fighting. China's folks. I agree with that statement quite a bit, actually, Brian, that China does not want a war with Taiwan. They would see it as being horribly expensive and very disruptive. And they don't like things that are disruptive or expensive. They want calm on the international front, and they want to focus on developing and doing business. I agree with you. Yeah. So while the world is struggling with recessions, Brian, I'm not sure you're aware that China is struggling with a recession as well. They're struggling with a property collapse at this point. The Chinese government is backstopping banks. There's been a decline in consumer demand. You see here. Who said Snap to 5? Snap is a company that I don't really follow. So I'm just not interested in it. Maybe somebody could make me interested in it. So yes. What are my thoughts on Tesla's Q3 results? So I've been around the block enough on Tesla, especially like the 2016 time range when Tesla results looked like really, really bad, when they were going through factory build outs, when they were going through ramp ups and that sort of thing. And let's remember that the Berlin and Austin factories right now are just like burning money like a giant furnace as they build up their production capacity. And typically in that build out phase, Tesla has not been able to meet production targets. It was only after the build out phase that production targets were able to be met. And also Tesla's got a long history of missing results, missing earnings, and coming back, a quarter later, 3 quarters later, and things start looking better. So I don't really think much about the Tesla Q3 results. I don't think it represents a decline in demand. I think it represents some hiccups in the production process, but to me, it's totally expected. Here's what I didn't like about listening to the talk, right? So we've all been mesmerized sometimes by Elon Musk's long and complicated answers to questions on those calls that get down into the weeds and answer some real specifics. This time around, man, he was really light on specifics. And I don't know if you were on the Palantir earnings call for last quarter, where I left the Palantir earnings call feeling a little bit disgusted by the fact that guy just didn't answer any questions whatsoever and just kept saying that they are the best in the world and they're going to dominate. That's a little bit of what I got out of this earnings call. I thought that Tesla didn't really, or Elon really didn't go into enough of specifics about questions that people had, and so this is one of the things that I found disappointing. It's probably one of the more disappointing earnings calls, but the actual results, weren't terrible to me. They're going to come really close to meeting their target of expanding their production by 50% for the year, their actual production of vehicles, which by any dimension, that is an amazing. You can increase your production by 50% and the demand is there to sell every car that you produce. That is an amazing, amazing feat. And I think that only continues going forward. And I don't know if we see 50% growth in the next year or if growth starts to slow. But by the end of 2023, Tesla's basically going to have a production capacity right at about 2.75 million. So, which, they got about 1.5 million today. And they're going to have production capacity at about 2.75 million by the end of 2023. That's going to be 2023. The end of that's going to be the real test for me, whether or not they really have the demand. In order for them to meet my expectations, they need to sell 7.7 million vehicles annually. I know they're saying they're going to make 20 million. I don't believe that. I know they're saying they're going to have autonomous taxis. I have less and less belief in that every day, and mostly because of the people that I'm talking to in the computer science world. So, Brian Lee says, I hear that Vietnam is under, turmoil because their prime minister is under hot water because his relatives are so much corruption during COVID-19. I knew they were coming soon. So I don't really comment too much on Vietnam in terms of their internal politics because I don't know a lot about their internal politics. And you'll find that I almost never comment on the internal politics of a foreign democracy. It's not on my business. I'll let in terms of dictatorships, whatever, I'll comment all day long because they don't represent their people. So let me see here. Michael, good question. I thought they were good. Like the fact that Elon mentioned new product lines, which he didn't share on the call. What do you think? So, I guess the big news, of course, is the not only is the Tesla Semi under production, but its first deliveries are due to happen in December. I think those are going to Pepsi Cola. Of course, those are going to be like local delivery trucks. It's probably not going to be thing, but I don't. We're not seeing the. I don't think we're going to see the Cybertruck till 2024. It's just not going to happen. And I think the bottleneck here has been the contracts that they already had to deliver the Tesla Semi and 4680 production. That is the bottleneck. And I think it doesn't have much to do with some of the other issues there. It's really just battery production. The biggest news out of there that is really going to affect share price going into next year is the buyback. Now, that is not the share buyback. Now, that is not a guarantee at this point. It still has to be discussed with the board and voted on, but that is absolutely going to cause the price to go up. And this is going to be very, very good for investors in Tesla. And this is something that he noted on Twitter a couple of weeks ago and then addressed directly in an interview and then mentioned it on the call as well. But it's not a done deal, but if he's looking to buy back anywhere between $5 to $10 billion of Tesla stock, that is good for everyone who's going to hold on to their Tesla stock. So Nathan Garner says, I am bullish on Elon. He delivers. So I'm a little bit less bullish on Elon at this point, just because I think he's distracted by the Twitter debacle, by Twitter fame, commenting on, proffering solutions that are basically appeasement, and then spending a lot of time dealing with the political blowback from that. But yeah. So I'm going to sell my Meta. So that Frantic Pillow, that's my answer to that. I'm going to sell my Meta. I think that the metaverse is going to be a thing. I don't think that Meta is going to have the working metaverse that they think they will. I think it'll be someone else. I also think the metaverse may not be the thing that we think it's going to be. And I think that it's an augmented reality that we are looking at as being the dominant technology. I mean, we're probably looking at industrial design and practical applications for augmented reality headsets to be worn like in public or to be used in vehicles, to be used in factories, that sort of thing. That's probably going to be sort of the dominant technologies there. The metaverse is probably going to turn out to be a lot like the experience investing in the metaverse may turn out to be a lot like the experience of investing in 3D printing. Okay. So I was one of the early investors in the first 3D printing craze back in 2010, 2012 timeframe. It got burned on every single one of those stocks. In fact, I may hold the record for buying 3D at the highest level ever. I think I bought it like $93 a share or something like that. And it was the highest that day. Ended up disposing of it around $30 a share or something like that. But no, I sold my Meta. I didn't own a lot, by the way, but I sold my Meta just because I had better use for those funds. But number two, I have lost the confidence that, there's a couple of companies doing big pivots right now. Square is one of those. And the jury is out on the pivot that Square is doing. But let's remember, Square has an underlying business that's still growing, right? Facebook, on the other hand, they have an underlying business where growth is slowing pretty significantly, and it's going to be really impacted by a recession. And and we look at the pivot to the metaverse. I don't know if they can pull that off. So Claire says, do you think SoFi will fare well in a higher interest rate environment? So the parts of their business that are not as well developed are going to fare higher, and that is their personal loan books, and that is their trading activities. And their trading activities, because they don't have like this giant fixed income trading department because of who their client base is, they're not going to benefit from it as much. And let's talk about that for a moment. This is these three, and I'm glad you brought that up, Claire, because I wanted to talk about these three companies today. Bank of America beats earnings target as net interest income and revenues rise. So profits are actually down for all banks right now, but that has a lot to do with the strengthening of currency. That has a lot to do with just increased costs. But the good news is that earnings are up because net interest income, meaning the money that they're receiving in interest payments from bonds, from loan spreads, loan and deposit spreads, that's all increasing. That's something that I told you was going to happen back in February, that if interest rates rise, we're going to see, a trailing effect where bank earnings start looking better and better and better. And that has started. Not only that, this time around, because we have an inverted yield curve and most, sorry, and that's actually because my posture is really bad. That's why my camera is really so. Today I'm kind of slumping over. My back hurts a little bit. But mostly because the of interest income is increasing here, but it's also being set up for a really long-term run in terms of great interest income and revenues from fixed income holdings in their portfolios, and also commissions on fixed income trades that they do for the clients. You're going to see those rise and rise and rise. Particularly right now, you're going to see fixed income commissions for short-term securities, say 90 days out to 3 years or so. You're going to see an explosion in revenues right now because the inverted yield curve is actually you get better yields anywhere from 2 to 5 years out on fixed income than you do out of the 30-year range right now, because people are anticipating that long-term debt yields are going to rise at some point, especially as we see the Federal Reserve start to sell bonds that are out there. We're going to see yields rise as the price drops a little bit. And that is going to cause a multi-year expansion of interest income as we see spreads widen and widen and widen. They're going to pay us a pittance for what we deposit, and they're going to collect a mint on what they sell to us. And this is how banks prosper always in rising interest rate environments. SoFi is not going to get as much of that as I'd like, right? But they have, they'll get it as it comes along and as their business in that area expands. But they're not in the position right now that they're going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries. You would need to be have one of these large fixed income departments. You'd want to serve a population that trades a lot of fixed income, and they just don't at this point. So, Bank of America, basically, let's see. So loan balances climbed about 12% for the year. Client activity is up by 8%. Let me see here. I'm trying to find where the actual revenue numbers were here. Much of the gain in revenue was due to net interest income climbing 24% to $13.8 billion. So interest income is already up 24%, and that's just a result of the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. That's all it is, and the fact that they still pay us jack squat on deposit support, and our deposits are risk-free. Remember that they are. And it's also the other part of that activity is commissions on folks that are now buying fixed income, which a lot of folks have not. So, and here we go. JP Morgan is reporting the same thing. JP Morgan posts record net income on Fed rate hikes. And oh man, this was showing earlier. I don't know why it stopped showing. But anyway, that is the real news that I wanted to cover today and didn't get to until an hour into this. I covered a lot of other stuff, including stuff wildly off topic that had more to do with geopolitics. I do enjoy talking about geopolitics, and I'm constantly learning about that as well. But no, this is really kind of the most important thing. I am personally going to be shifting, and there's two reasons why this actually makes me really happy right now. I don't mind buying these larger, more established players in the banking industry. They always know how to make money. The opportunity for growth at a reasonable price, though, has been lacking for the last couple of years. Right now, though, we are looking at Bank of America, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, all these other companies that are reporting anywhere from 18 to 24% increase in interest income. And not only that, it's a really a short duration debt that's going to need to be rolled over in the future as we see higher yields out on the long term. This is setting them up for multiple years of increased net interest income, which is something that they don't have to work for. It doesn't increase their costs at all. It helps support their profits, and their profits are down across the board, largely because assets they hold overseas have been impacted by the stronger U.S. dollar. But as yields rise here, and we're going to see as yields rise worldwide, and we're not so far out of step with the rest of the world, because we are out of step. Our yields are higher than most Western countries right now, which is one of the reasons that our dollar is stronger. As yields in other countries start to rise, we're going to see the strength in the US dollar level off. And we're going to see an even greater impact of net interest income on balance sheets. So I realize for a lot of folks, this is pretty boring, but this is a pretty good time to look at a Wells Fargo, to look at a JP Morgan, to look at a third bank or fifth bank, whatever it's called. I always forget, to look at these really large banking institutions. They are going to make money hand over fist in a high interest rate environment. They're going to make money hand over fist on home equity lines. They're going to make money hand over fist on, and look, we're not looking at this huge wave of refinances that's been happening over the years as well, which has been a bit of a poison pill for banks where they've had to make the money on origination fees. Now the loans that they do make are going to be done at a higher interest rate, and they're going to keep them on their balance sheet rather than trying to box them up and sell them off in securities. So we are setting the market conditions have set banks up for multiple years. Even if we see a recession, there's going to be multiple years of really solid earnings. And even if we don't see these companies really take off, it's going to be a safer investment than a lot of the technology stocks that we've been talking about on my channel for the last couple of years. Even though I really love those technology stocks and not getting rid of those, a lot of the new money that I get when I get it is going to be buying really boring stocks. And there's even some really boring industrial stocks I'm going to be buying as well. So anyway, I am out of time for today, guys. I went a little bit over, about 10 minutes over my intended time period. I need to get ready to leave the house, but I wanted to thank you guys for attending today. I really appreciate this. And, like I said, super chat features are always on. Didn't do any of that today. That's not why I do it, but I had really good questions today. I really appreciate that. And I really enjoyed this one today, guys. I will see you next Monday for sure, and next Thursday for sure. Thank you very much.